My name is Bernard Sweeney, and this is what we call the Outside the Colony podcast. And I was saying this to Aldaf Reed on my last podcast about being outside the colony, which I mean, in a way, it's kind of like outside of conventional thinking, outside the colonial language, outside systems and its institutions. And eventually you get out there to be nothing to think about because all you're taught to be in the colonial mentality. So in a way, we're trying to get there. We're trying to say there is no travelers, there is no settled, there is no country people, there is no black, there is no white. That all these labels have an origins. And for where we're coming from, it's outside the colony. So in other words, outside of English colonization. And that, yeah, it's going to take a bit of time, I think, for people to grasp where I'm coming from as a traveler, because I don't have the formal educational or qualifications. So I come with a lot of lived experience, community knowledge, and then later on finding out the Gaelic conquest and so on and so forth. So it didn't take a whole lot to put it all together and make these connections to bring us right here today. And we're joined with a professional historian, Kieran O'Loughlin, who's based in Dublin, I believe, is it?
Dublin, yeah. I've moved around though. I've been in sort of Galway and Belfast, and I suppose I just want to say Slum Darahog. I don't know, is that, am I pronouncing that correctly? The Traveller Cant language just wanted to say thanks and good evening. Guramahagi for sort of inviting me on. I know you have a lot of appreciation for the work you are doing in looking at this whole question of colonization and decolonization and what is in and side and outside the colony, and how can that sort of drive us forward as well in society. I mean, if people start picking up and learning the sort of roots of a lot of our problems, I suppose, then they can move forward and make a better society for all of us. And I think that's part of the main thing that I would want to sort of go over or pass over is, this understanding, even on the left in Ireland, even in progressive circles. And I sent you a couple of articles there by attacks that were made on the Irish language during the week by so-called progressives, but we might come to that later. But this understanding that the Ireland really doesn't still suffer with the consequences of colonization, that's all in the past, it's done and dusted, especially after 1922 and the 26 counties. There's nothing to be said about that anymore. And sure, we're independent now. Obviously, at the coalface of colonisation in the 6 counties, they're still grappling with it in a very material way, politically, and in terms of the bigotry of unionism and everything around that. But there's a belief in the 26 counties that it doesn't have any bearing on society, but nothing really could be further from the truth, I think. If you look at, really, there was no decolonisation process in the 20s, the 30s, and then after that, if you get into, and we can talk about that in these things in more detail maybe later, if you get into the 60s, really, when the economy of the 26 counties changed radically with sort of more globalization, so more really more hyper capitalism coming in, where it was all about multinational companies rather than indigenous economies. And that's interesting in itself, I suppose, that question of how can an indigenous mentality grow an indigenous economy, because the belief is that sort of these two things aren't linked at all, that the ideologies or ideas around culture, language, decolonization, that these things aren't linked into the real material world, where capitalism gets on with things and money is made and so forth. And again, even the left sort of believes that to a certain extent, with the sort of campaigns that they have and so forth. They're very focused, or what you might call economistic. They're only focused really on the economy. And of course, we need to struggle in the economic sphere on stuff like workers' rights, stuff like pay, conditions, all the stuff that makes our lives, bread and butter stuff that makes our lives livable. We need to, of course, struggle for that. But I think there's a parallel mode of struggle that could be going on, especially on the left. It's not around culture, around decolonisation and so forth. So that's just my kind of general view of the whole thing and where it can, potentially lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're saying rings home. It makes sense. Where we're coming from ourselves. As we say, like the label Irish traveller here in the moment. If you go back a little bit further, they used to call us tinkers. Then you go back a bit further than that, they used to call us itinerants. And all them labels were English colonial labels. So who were the English putting them labels on? They were putting them on Irish people. Then, of course, there was the penal laws and the martial laws, which I'm no expert in any of this, but snippets and bits and pieces I've been putting through together throughout my life. Since I was a child, I was thinking about these things, about the settler mentality and the traveller mentality and how we all got here and how come nobody's coming in to explain any of this. Why were children being othered and put in the back of the class? Why was there traveller-only buses? Why was there traveller-only schools? Like all this segregation was growing up in right up to the almost 2000s. And then we know other segments of that where there was institutional homes. So it isn't about playing the victim. It isn't about saying, oh, we the poor travellers. We understand that there's a lot of people on the island that are suffering from the hangovers of colonialism.
Sorry, could I just mention that you touched on, or Kieran touched on something interesting there, what do you call it? You mentioned in the 60s about the economy, and what Bernard used to be talking about there. Sometimes you'd have mentioned that it's in the 60s. It's also, I just was thinking, it's also in the 60s that the two go hand in hand. It's in 1963 when in part of the projects we were dealing with, where Bernard mentions about it's when they first become really systematic about we're going to deal with travellers as a problem, for example. Suddenly there are not just people wandering around the countryside and everyone kind of taking no notice, but now they're actually labelled as an issue that's going to be...
Going back to 1963 as an example of how far we moved. And at the time, this was considered, I think, very forward-thinking, the Commission on Itinerancy in 1963. And their terms of reference, really, when we look back on them, are absolutely staggering. It was inbuilt to look at the travellers as a problem. And they said the Commission was to inquire into the problem arising from the presence in the country of itinerants in considerable numbers, to examine the economic, educational, health and social problems inherent in their way of life, to promote their absorption into the general community. No recognition here of their ethnicity or of how distinctly different they were. Membership of the Commission was by a former judge. There was no representative of the traveller community, no representative from the Department of Social Welfare.
You mentioned before that actually it goes hand in hand with this idea that we're going to be modern, and we're going to be modern. We have to create an economy, and an economy is something that comes from outside the country, not from inside. And therefore, I think that, as we would say, and I'd say we're all on the same page here to some degree, is that all of these things are all linked, all the way from everything, from doesn't matter what's Irish language, travellers at that time, and the whole concept of the state of this state's idea of what success is. And as you say, the thing would be in that, I think the key being that it's the failure. I was wondering, maybe you could say something about it. You might know a little more than we do about the fact that there was a resistance in history in the modern state. There seems to be resistance, is there, in general, or do you find it still of putting any of these things into the context of Ireland's colonial past?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, we got a peer review of an article that I wrote a couple of months ago. I got it back last week, and you get 2 peer reviews usually. And at the start of both of them, they both sort of questioned. They said, "Oh, the sort of body of the analysis is all right," which had to do with the Grail School or whatever. But they questioned the whole premise. They were like, some scholars say, there's much debate still over whether Ireland was really a colony or not. So, like, that's historians who are still believing that, maybe Ireland was a kingdom. This was some of the rubbish that was planted by revisionists back in the 80s, that really Ireland was a kingdom and not a colony, and then evolved into a sort of democratic component of the UK and, had better standing than the colonies of the global south and so forth. So that's very much prevalent. It's still there. Come back to what Bernard said, nobody really, on trauma, nobody's really writing about that. There is one person who wrote about it, he just passed last year, Thomas McShimo, and he wrote a book called The Broken Harp, Identity and Language in Modern Ireland, or something along those lines. And he was a biologist, so he actually did a sort of genetic and epigenetic sort of take on this thing of trauma and how it would actually pass from generation to generation. So he said it's not only culturally passed, but it's actually passed in the DNA. And that's what leads to sort of what Bernard was talking, the high levels of schizophrenia, mental health problems, alcoholism, all these things. So there's only one person that I know that's written about, and it's McShimo, and he was a great philosopher. But 100% what you're saying there, Dylan, that's fascinating. That there is a definite correlation there in the 60s. And you had the economic program by T.K. Whitaker in 1958. He wrote that, and that really kick-started things. And then the Itinerancy Act 1863, which is well known about, talk about the final solution for the traveller problem, only 15 years after Hitler was talking about final solutions on the continent. In 64, then you had an act called education. I can't remember, it's out slipping my mind now, but it's basically a massive piece of educational legislation, or a report, into education. And it was issued by the Department of Education, and it comes on the back of that program for economic development. And one of the things that it sort of identified was that there was too much time being spent on the teaching of Irish in the education system, and the people needed to be sort of basically saying that people needed to be drones for this common consumer economy and this common hyper-capitalist economy where, everyone's trained up to be in multinationals, and there's no thought of indigenous economy or indigenous mentality or anything else. What we call the sort of IDA mentality, the Industrial Development Authority mentality, which Mary Kenny, I sent the article to Bernard, but I know it was behind a paywall. It wouldn't have made a difference, because you could read the headline and just know what she was going to say. It was going to be rubbish. She said basically that, Ireland has stood to benefit from being, or has benefited hugely economically from being an English-speaking country, because Facebook and Google invest in the 26 counties as a result. Forgetting about countries like Denmark of a similar size that are still, capitalist countries, but are much as competitive, shall we say, in terms of GDP as Ireland, but are much more content in terms of their well-being and so forth. So, it has nothing to do with language. That's a very it's just a colonial mentality to believe that somehow if we speak English we'll be richer. It's so crude. It's to be laughable, you know what I mean? And then in it was Aviop and the Gaeilge was the report in 64, and then the education report came in 65, and both of them, 2 years on from the itinerancy report, basically denigrating Gaelic culture and following on in that whole 60s mode of being modern, that you can't be both. You can't be modern and Gaelic. You have to be modern and Anglo-American.
Elaine Martin, psychologist, I believe, she had written something in 2012. I'll send it on to you. I think it's about the colonial systems, institutions, and how their narcissism is built into them, almost by design. It's interesting when we take a sort of step outside the colony and you see this Dublin, which in itself has a very fascinating history, because it wasn't Irish. Even today, calling itself Irish using an English operating system, all the English programs and the institutions and the laws, it kind of contradicts everything to be Irish in the first place. So they took that over there, the Green Shawl in 1916 and onwards, where then they cut off the rest of the Gaelic revivalists, the artists, suppressed women, Protestants, thinkers, so on and so forth. But it didn't have a Gaelic mentality, which is one of the reasons why I keep telling travel organizations, stop asking a system to understand our psychology when their psychology is completely different in the first place. They're not necessarily say they are who they are. They're presenting us as the default normal Irish, but yet it's contradictory everything they do. So I would say that Dublin had a kind of a complex upbringing like everybody else. A couple of generations later, they grew up, they are the Irish, but they're still steeped almost subconsciously into the old colonial English way of thinking about things in an Irish context. I think this sometimes you see these clashes with the East and the West. Say like the East wants to celebrate something like the Black and Tans. In their mentality, that's perfectly normal. They're tuned into that. That's their people and so on and so forth. The West of the country gets very confused as why Irish people will be celebrating the Black and Tans. So you see these over and back. But you're absolutely right. In Dublin, they have no real deep consciousness to understand the colonial process because they were a particular side of it. They were almost a very safe side of it for a very long time. Things about Dublin, about a psychological blind spot, because it was a while back, Jean O'Doherty, I think it was, and she was saying it was about the free trade run with England.
Decided in the morning to ban people from Northern Ireland travelling to the south of Ireland. If we banned people from the United Kingdom mainland to allow, to be coming to Ireland, based on the fact that we have the 800 years of common travel.
Mentality, she's correct. It never happened like that. It only happened for the rest of the Ireland beyond the Pale, I believe.
So we have to be. So what you're saying when you say Dublin, I have to clarify this, don't you? You mean the systems, obviously, not.
Oh, absolutely.
Not everyone in Dublin.
Yeah, and it does have a wonderful history because it was caught between the kingdom, or the empire, and it was caught between my cousins beyond the Pale.
Yeah, well, we go back a little further. That's the thing. That's in archaeology. Just if you were saying there, that's why we go back a little further, telling stories. As you know, Kieran, we also have a gap of like what's the Gaelic Ireland, even the existence of it as a real thing before, as it was, when it was intact politically and everything up until the 17th century, has been also successfully suppressed, really, almost, or never quite revived. And obviously there's we have a lot of reasons for that, which I think you mentioned on your notes, like for example, you've touched on the counter-revolution that kind of puts paid to the Gaelic part of the revolution and all, and as well as the socialism and everything else, unfortunately. But then manages to construct this whole identity, but manages to get rid then, as Bernard's saying, manages to construct this idea of an Irish identity, but without that Gaelic component being at the forefront, really, and without addressing or the socialism, well, we can get into that in a minute, and without addressing any of the reality of colonialism, and also without addressing, and this is why we like to go back a little further, just back to that 1600s, and a little further than that sometimes, into the 16th century, to the time of the conquest, just to see what's the scenario, what's the state of affairs at that point in time, and that, for people to understand that Gaelic Ireland was a real thing that actually was obviously the dominant culture on the island for a long time. But what we find then is that quite often the education, and probably stemming from this act you're talking about as well to some degree, suppressed, obviously, and I'm very interested in that because it's at the same time. So that's really interesting that Irish language is also out the window at the same time because we're being modern. And along with, as Bernard said, along with travellers, things like that. So basically, all these elements of Irish, any remnants of Irish culture that would remind them of the past. Now, it's really interesting to me, obviously, is more, my thing is more medieval times. But actually what I'd be looking at is just that these are laws and behaviours that are coming from, say, like the Pale, when it has an English identity more so, even though it's a mixed Irish-English identity, but the system of the Pale, the judges, all that kind of stuff that had built up through the Middle Ages, it's completely within character for it to make those kind of laws, those kind of stopping people from moving, looking down on the Irish language, mostly concerned in its day with not so much about suppressing the clans outside the walls of the Pale, but more to do with stopping its own people, stopping people who it regarded as civilized, those within the Pale from taking Irish habits, from wearing Irish clothing, from all that kind of thing that we're familiar with. And so one of the ideas that I had been working with as well was that in 1922 you have a counter-revolution. That's true. But that what you also have is with the English peeled away, you end up with the re-emergence of almost like the Pale society again. Basically, like idea of a Catholic, because it's the systems, the church, the very reactionary systems, the judiciary, the church, the things like this. I might be simplifying it a bit too much, but those kind of forces, it's almost, you could almost predict that if you were to take away the English layer above the empire layer, that you might get if it's not addressed, and it wasn't, that you would get a resurgence of the old Pale mentality, basically. And that the system would just continue kind of to do what it had always done, which is it had looked to England. And this is what Bernard just said a second ago. We collect, no more than yourself, we collect these kind of examples where you get them in the news and that. And one hilarious one was Regina Doherty, wasn't it, saying that I think during COVID, we couldn't possibly block transport, what was it, have checks coming from England or from the north or something like that, because she said that would be ridiculous. She said there's been a free travel area for 800 years between the two places.
I remember that,
yeah.
Common travel area,
yeah, so there's this common travel area, and we were fascinated with this, because we're kind of looking at it going, that's amazing, because really, that on the one, as Bernard said, on the one hand, that's, so people would ask, yeah, why are you going back so far into history? But actually, for her to say that, it's true, but only if you were looking at it purely from the point of view almost of a Norman within the Pale, if you know what I mean, or a person within the city. It could be the city of Waterford or Galway even, but only in those places, only within the walled cities would that be true. And obviously she's able to say it and sort of get away with it because people aren't even aware, it should have even been dismissed, but she's able to sort of get away with it because it's very hazy, people's concept of what exactly was going on. And she's able to say, oh, it was a common travel area. No, that's not true. We were laughing because we were saying, yeah, there is, between, say, like in the 1500s, between Dublin for centuries, you can go from Dublin to England, no problem. That is a common travel area. But what she's not telling you is that she couldn't go 10 miles west to Wicklow because there wasn't one. She'd have to get a pass from the O'Toole's or somebody, you know what I mean, or Havana's or something. But of course, none of that is really clear in people's minds, is it? And I think that's one thing I point out, is that it's kind of like the lack of a physical reality to Gaelic Ireland is actually a real problem in trying to pursue a lot of these, to rebalance a lot of these things. Would you think?
Yeah, and it's a while now since I've had any sort of contact with the secondary level education system where a lot of that would be formed, I suppose, where a lot of these tropes around, simple things like, the Civil War, where the Civil War is simplified into Collins v. Dev, or where 20th century Ireland is just a miracle of modernisation, and Gaelic Ireland is smashed simply in 1601 and doesn't exist thereafter. It's a while since I've looked at that and how people are, or how secondary students would be engaging with that. But certainly outside of school, I mean, there's no talk of Gaelic Ireland really. Even now, I'm half Manx myself. My man's from the Isle of Man. There's a sort of interesting battle going on in other Gaelic places, I suppose, between in terms of museums and curatorship and all that sort of stuff, where it was a known thing there in the Isle of Man to focus more on the Vikings than the Celtic or the Gaelic, just because that was the mentality, was to not, or to be anti-Gaelic essentially. And I believe there was similar sorts of wars maybe in the 70s and 80s with the National Museum in Dublin around what their focus was. You would know more about this than me, Dylan. The emphasis wasn't on Gaelic Ireland in terms of museums, and in general, the OPW and things like that have been critiqued about that sort of stuff before. But I mean, the scholarship has moved on. Like, there's a book there by Nicholas Wolff, which is interesting, which actually really traces a persistence of Gaelic Ireland into the 1870s, really strong in terms of dealing, or Irish-speaking Ireland dealing or imposing itself really in a rebellious way on the sort of institutions of colonisation, the courts, the church being one of them, and the school system, where the story is really that it was always on the decline in the 19th century from especially the foundation and national school system, and then you have the economy and, you know, the need to interact with the marketplace and whatnot in on top of that, and people like O'Connell denigrating the language. But there was a persistence there that's not talked about, and even a continuation into modern times, like the Brat Gaeltachtaí or the former Ear Gaeltachtaí in places like you know, County Derry, where there's a decolonial project going on there now in Carntucker. The reason that decolonial project started, and they've started to revive the Irish language, is because they actually remembered the last Irish speakers there in the 1950s, and they knew, you know, so that's those links, those continuities existed in a lot of places, and it's the reason why there's still threads, or there's still revivals going on there. Like, it hasn't been completely anglicised, these portions. But certainly in terms of the counter-revolution, yeah, they were looking towards England, and you know, even in terms of simple things that they could have done, like gutting the civil service, they didn't. 98% of civil servants in 1921 were still civil servants in 1924, you know what I mean? So obviously the mentality is not going to change if you're not going to even root out the personnel. And then it was a very easy thing from then to lurch from, you know, that sort of pro English mentality into pro imperial American mentality in the 60s. Really, it's just lurching from one empire to the next and not standing on your own 2 feet, really. In the end of the day, that was economic policy, you know, I suppose, from the 1920s, where Ernest Blythe, who was an Irish speaker himself, which sort of shows some of the contradictions of this. Just because you speak Irish, just like Aidan O'Riordan there, who was attacking the language during the week, just because you speak Irish doesn't mean that you have a sort of decolonial.
We are locking out a lot of disadvantaged students. We're locking out a lot of young people from perhaps the education in the north, and certainly from migrant backgrounds, and it's not a good enough reason. So my basic premise is that it's the standard of Irish teaching that you have on leaving college, which is a teacher training college, which is much more important on entry. And I would say this much. I mean, it's been Labour Party policy.
How would you assess those who are entering teacher training college then, if not by their
well, to the basic competency
result?
that you have in terms of points. I mean, that's the way that we've assessed any other course, and you have a basic requirements.
But do you not agree that an ordinary level Irish, that it might lead to teachers who didn't have the confidence and the skills to teach Irish, and if you can't teach it properly, you can't really pass it on?
You can have ordinary level English, you can have ordinary level maths, and become a primary school teacher.
So there's too much focus on the teaching of Irish in the teacher training colleges.
I would feel so. I feel we're losing the potential for a huge number of young people from diverse backgrounds.
You know, as a collective, if more people spoke Irish, I believe there'd be more of a decolonial mentality, but it doesn't always hold true at the individual or the personal level.
No, it can be. Can I say something? Can I just say something quick, Bernard? That it does in archaeology, like you're talking about. Actually, notice in archaeology has a big problem. So, say for example, in a very simple way, it can work almost on autopilot. So all those systems, not just about individual, what people think. It's not that it's conscious, but the fact they didn't change anything in the 20s, like we talked about. But then what happens is it sort of works on the whole system that had been set up before that, had built up before that. Say very simple things like counties, and I would have talked about that. Where in archaeology, for example, I used to see it years ago, and I've said this example a good few times, but because counties are the official thing of the official unit of local government or whatever, and the official thing in, you know, they only had, but they were of course mostly created obviously under the empire. They're an English construction. It means that without our missing colonial context, it means that we just assume counties somehow have always been there. But of course, they actually only cover, if we have 1,500 years of written history, the counties only cover 400 of it in most places. A little bit longer in some of the eastern seaboard, but that's essentially it. And certainly in Sligo, like it's only in about 1600s that it sort of comes to that straight away is like the county. But ironically, here's the irony of it all, is that the county is still the official thing that you have to put all the maps and data in. So if I was to download data, and right now Irish antiquities in Sligo. I'm given it in the form of all the castles in County Sligo, right? But what I'm not given is, here the irony being that none of the castles in Sligo were built when Sligo existed.
Mhm.
So all of them were built when the various tours of Sligo existed, you know. The McDonough's up there in Tyroleal and the Carbra, Drumcliff, or whatever it is that we're sitting in now. And of course, because they're not officially anything, they don't exist except as frozen baronies in some maps. We have this kind of it keeps reinforcing itself, so that the county keeps on is not got any connection to the history of what Bernard's talking about. You know, even the names of travellers' names, or even and across the board from travellers that are still in the same districts, as well as Irish people in general, in the wider population, whose names are all tied to these old territories. And yet there's no access to that because the counties are the thing. And the counties are essentially, they have their own history now, but they're essentially meaningless when it comes to Gaelic Ireland. And we had that example recently. Remember the controversy recently, Bernard, I was going to mention. A waterfall out here called Brochainaig on Ord. Some kind of Irish phrase, I'm not sure. It's like literally the stream against the height or something, I'm not sure. But I think it's a phrase that means the water that runs backwards. And it's very unusual stream because when the wind blows, the stream flows. It looks like it flows backwards. Essentially, blows it back up a cliff. But what's unusual about it is there's no English name. And back in 2017, it's one of the last things in Sligo that probably has no English name or no English equivalent, and no real translation. And in about 2017, the county council, like we're talking about, starts this tourism drive, various walks, opens this place up to a walk, great stuff, lovely up in the mountains, changes the name to the Devil's Chimney, with no connection, no translation, no attempt at anything, and puts official signage up, does all of this. Now even on the Wikipedia that I sometimes would edit for historical thing occasionally, especially local things, I can't even change it back because I'll have objections from around the world, and rightly so in a way, but I have objections from them saying, but the county council says this is the name. And because the county council says it, I can't revert it. You know what I mean? And so what's essentially happened is that they've managed to, like, between the county council and their, you know, despite all their stuff about keeping heritage and names alive and all this, have managed now to almost obliterate the last Irish only name of a landmark in the county. And all really kind of because it suited, you know, marketing and ignorance and, you know, that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like on autopilot, going around just eliminating little bits of the old culture.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, much the same thing, really. It's a systematic mentality, like manufacturing mentalities. That's how I seen the school at a very young age. A bit like the Village of the Damned, you know, how the children were walking around in unison in uniform and they were looking and stopping and staring. I was kind of seeing that because they didn't give me an education, so I had a lot of time to think. But I went through that kind of process of analysing people, the teachers, the school.
Oops.
And all that stuff. But you see them, it's a strange. This is my mind, of course. This is what I grew up with, looking at. But if you take an example of taking an organisation, even a football club, we see how people fall in love with the football club. They buy the symbol, they buy the images, they go, they fight. Could be an English club, doesn't matter. Some people in organisations adapt the psychology of the organisation. You actually start to believe that they are the labels. So if all them systems and programs are unchanged old English, well, the patterns of them systems will keep repeating over and over and over again. So if we were to take Irish travellers in the present day, and why we speak about history is because the same history that most settled people believe it's in the past, we're saying it's still our living experience today. So it isn't even the past we're talking about. We're talking about young travellers 9 years of age taking their lives because they're bullied over their ethnicity, because nobody on the island knew their ethnicity. Including Trinity College, Maynooth College, and those that did were very, very quiet. They didn't come out. They didn't know, so it wasn't their fault. It's a bit like the class system. Why would we take a step back? Because we didn't come from the class system. So if I look at the class system, I see the working class who've been given a particular kind of segregated education, almost like a vocational job. Then you got the middle class who have access to Trinity College, Maynooth College, and all these institutions. Then you got the private schools for the elites. They're three class systems of the same people. And they've been operating that system for at least 500 years. that system has been running. Remember earlier on about the gentleman Irish and the gentlewoman Irish at the very top, then the civil Irish in the middle, and the wild Irish at the bottom. That's no different from the elites, the middle class, or the working class. So if we were to take travellers in the present and keep history in the mind, remove the label travellers, remove the label thinkers, remove the label itinerants, and then we have a Gaelic people, Irish clans. The question then becomes, who are the settled mentality? So we bring it into the present day again, just for a moment. And now we're looking at young travellers taking their lives. We see these people who have got part-held systems and part-held laws. The only Irish people on the island that have laws with their ethnicity mentioned in it. That's part-held systems. That's part-held laws. The fact will be then is, why are well-educated Irish people in general still inside a colonial institution, practicing the same systems that oppressed their ancestors, forcing people to adapt what they call the normal way of living in a house, get a job, pay your tax, and play by the rules? But if all of them are unchanged since 1922, well, isn't that any different from what the English were trying to force on us for centuries anyways? So just take them laws in the present, and we'll run back quickly on this one. It's a parallel. It's this system you're talking about. You're wondering, why are things working out the way they're working out? Take all these acts and laws and attitudes that are used today at travellers. Indeed, rural Irish, native Irish, they all get it. We're not a separate group. We know we came from the same people. We know we'll go back far enough, these labels didn't exist. But we're taking the present moment, and we're saying to the settled people around us, we're saying, look, we have to step outside these mentalities, out of these colonial mentalities. If this language and these words and these thoughts and these expressions came with a colonial force, a trauma-filled force, forced people to adapt to it, generations, centuries later, people grew up believing this was their natural reality, that there was always houses, we always spoke English. This is why some of the Irish speakers can speak brilliant Irish, but they haven't got a clue about the foundation they're standing on. They haven't got that knowledge. Most of them have lost it, like travellers. It happens us all. Sometimes you'll even see it when NGOs and so on and so forth, people go into systems, they adapt that program, they start to look through the world through that lens. Systematically and almost accidentally, they'll continue the same process from the same program, from the same operating system that have been oppressing the island for forever.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and we think 100% on the sort of imposition. They don't even make any sense, a lot of them. If you look at the names, I mean, the anglicisation of the place names, there's no meaning to most of them. They're just barely whatever. But if you look at the Gaelic Luganum or the place name, you actually understand what is meant by that place, or there's sort of, centuries of knowledge and wisdom bound up in about the geography of the place, and there's stuff around places being named like wetlands and things like that, because that's what they mean. But in English, they don't mean wetlands. So you get people, Celtic Tiger developers, building houses on wetlands, whereas if they had known, the Gaelic origin.
The Shannon I'm thinking of now, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Carrick-on-Shannon's a good example.
Yeah. Oh yeah, anywhere around there, yeah. But they didn't cop that. Or there's floodplains around Cork as well, and in the Midlands that there's names for them in Irish that would have told them that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's going on, and then even more sort of annoyingly, there's companies, say like Aircode, when they were brought on by government to do the to change the old system of the post to air codes. What they did was even in the Gaeltacht areas, they started imposing the anglicised version of places like Cataroo or Spidale, places like that, Connemara, on to people who didn't want it, and you couldn't change it back. So they were, as you say, it is systematic. It's just on autopilot. They just do it and impose this thing that curtails people's rights, curtails their sort of their culture, their language, and their right to use their language. That's I forgot what I was going to say. It was investment in education was that report actually in 1964. It just came to me. But yeah, there's a lot about the sort of imposition of these systems in very personalized ways. I mean, even things that people who, the colonized mentality will be, or why you're so bothered about putting your name right into an internet. When you're signing up to go fly somewhere or take the train or whatever, you can't put your name in Irish. And they fixed that in Inroad Ireland. And you get, the Shawnee, they think this is sort of whimsical thing, but it is a denial of your identity that you can't even use that in a sort of system that's there founded by the state and run by the state. A system, funnily enough, with Inroad Ireland that changed its name to Irish Rail. So that's happening at the level of the state bodies as well. There was the board Planala here just this week now. They're talking about changing it to the Planning Commission, as though that's going to resolve the problems of corruption in it. If they just sort of, ditch the old Irish board Planala and, think around with some of the mechanics within the institution, and then but just name it the Planning Commission. So again, we're modern and we're progressive and we're not corrupt and Irish or whatever the mentality there is. It's not really clear. But
do you think, Kieran, that the reverse of that would be almost an art form in itself? A bit like, like the Gaelic revivalists, to use arts to create that image, that uprising. Tinker culture, of course, was pretty much mentioned, well mentioned. Come 1963, nobody knew who we were. But back then they knew who we were. But do you think that is also kind of missing in the general population? You don't see movies like you might see Japan dipping into their ancient culture of samurais, or the Chinese, or India, or wherever else it might be. You don't see that in Ireland. They seem to get a bit psychologically blocked and stopped at the famine. And there's also this thing about the Irish language again. Most chambers are removed out of the classroom when the Irish language was being taught to other children. So it's a very systematic thing. In 1989, Fine Gael had them remove ethnic and nationality in the Hate Crime Act bill, whatever they want to call it, and left it as travelling people. So people who were absurd the whole time, or blocked off, thinking they didn't know what was going on with these people. They could see them there in front of them, but they didn't understand. So a lot of it was kind of like, certainly people were impoverished also. Not a way we kind of look at it sometimes when we take a step back. It's like saying, we're all Irish, or we're all whatever we want to be, Gaels, we're all outside the colony. But the whole island was almost processed over centuries with institutions that were born out of colonization. So it's almost like everybody on the island has been almost assimilated, and we're like the last people being dragged in the door. We went unnoticed in the 1960s. But I wonder, do you think arts would be a great way of kind of changing, making Gaelic arts popular, or whatever it might be, would connect with younger people also?
Oh, definitely. And you're 100% correct there, that the stronger the culture, I suppose, in places like Japan, or on the continent where they didn't suffer colonization, and unfortunately they were colonizers themselves, but that's a different story for another day. But yeah, there's less less reluctance to look back and draw on those histories and use the arts or use the language. I'm not fully negative on that, though. I do see that there's sort of some revivals in terms of the use of Irish in terms of the arts, certainly. But there was that comes in waves, I think. Like it came in the revival, and it did spring forth a political movement. But there's been other sort of artists in terms of the Irish language, mini revivals maybe in the 70s and in the 60s, against when modernization, Anglo modernization, started really taking hold. But the thing is, it needs the base of political change. It's hard to drive a decolonial project on the arts alone. It can be an important leg on the stool, if you like, but it needs a political movement around it. One of the interesting things, I suppose, and you were referring to it, Bernard, probably was, I suppose, since the famine, these mentalities have really gotten hold. You see in the 1850s, turning away from the old sort of folk customs, especially, and really the church this period called the sort of devotional revolution, is what Emmett Larkin called it, when the church between 1850 and 1870 really got a grip on the Irish middle class, because of course most of the working class, and this is the problem with modern Ireland, especially the 26 counties down to today, and not just in terms of any decolonial project, but any sort of socialist project or anything like that, is that the working class was wiped away in the famine, and then what was left was the middle class, and they were very easy to sort of manipulate into a Anglo-centric view through the Catholic Church, and that's what happened. Before the famine, church attendance was very low, and Gaelic, the western portions of Ireland, didn't even attend church. They did patterns, they did sort of feast days and things like that. They didn't actually go and listen to a priest. And it was after the famine that the priests really got a stranglehold on the Irish psyche. That's
Yeah, there's I think that did leave its psychological mark for sure. But even say, I think we'll pop back to, I think it was 1530 to come up with the Vagrancy Act. This is the very early stages. So this is how we know there's a kind of a pattern and like a parallel. And sometimes you hear people talking about either epigenetics, intergenerational trauma, and so on and so forth. But when you take a step back from it, when you see where the trauma had started with the Surrender and Regrant, followed with the Vagrancy Act, including one in 1847, right in the middle of the famine, they come up with a Vagrancy Act right out of Dublin, telling them to stay in their positions, do not to leave their settlements, or they'll be arrested. At the same time, the Transportation Act, I believe, was still running at that time. So sometimes people might feel that people weren't oppressed, but they were psychologically oppressed one way or the other, because there was all that looming with acts, laws, and policies. But yeah.
We would say, I don't know, the what's his name, Stephen Ellis, historian in Galway, of the English colony in Ireland, and I would say that one thing, that in order to get as part of this decolonial process, that one of the things that myself and Bernard had thought about is that, and looking at his work, Ellis's work, is that he had written one paper which was along the lines that he had because they threw this green cloak, as Bernard said earlier, across themselves after the 20s, and even before that, actually in the 1800s, when this modern identity was being created. So even the kind of in the southern state, the kind of this is as Bernard says, the default Irish, you know what I mean, and travellers are out the window, and Irish speakers are in the past, and all that kind of stuff. But Ellis himself had that problem because the settled English-speaking settled community, whatever way you want to say it, had become our middle class version of it, had become the default. We're the normal ones. It meant everyone else was out the window. But one of the sacrifices of that is not only the Gaelic world, but actually also the English colony in Ireland. That actually in the north, it's more obvious because it was Protestant. It was a little bit later. But in the south, the colony was older and was Catholic, and had been there since the 12th century. But the middle classes that had run the state in Dublin since the 12th century until the 16th century were Catholic, firmly identified as English right up till 1700s, until Cromwell hammered them by accident, thinking, or sort of by accident on purpose, thinking they were massacring Catholics, you know what I mean? But he basically hit them so hard that it became a religion divide rather than the cultural divide it had been before. But before that, it spent 5 centuries being absolutely firm. This is the institutions now, the systems within the cities of being firm, even though the Irish was spoken in the cities and all that kind of stuff. But the system itself was firmly loyal to the crown and had been.
In reality, then, the English Pale was a frontier region, a micro-region of the 16th century English state. But significantly, it's rarely studied historically in its English context. Rather, as is commonly the case with other regions, the Pale's history is chiefly studied in the context of national history, meaning in this case as an integral part of Ireland, not as an English outpost. The descendants of the English of early Tudor Ireland were of course later on subsumed into an Irish nation, and with the partition of Ireland in 1920, the Pale, which had once been Ireland's English heartland, became the core territory of an independent Irish Free State.
Says that we actually kind of, as part of a decolonial project, you kind of have to, and one of the ways of decolonizing is you have to also bring into consciousness the reality of our English heritage, if you want to put it in, for want of putting it another way. We all speak English, we all have those systems, we've inherited them. And one of the problems with actually deconstructing them is not recognizing them, if you know what I mean. As in not, and also not bringing out the kind of, and giving it its due as well, which is the English nature of the urban environment in most of Ireland, which is includes Cork, Waterford, Dublin, you know, Galway. Hilariously, calling it City of the Tribes, but I mean, and it's very, it's a unique culture because it's this strange Norman Irish mix, you know, and English as well. But it's, but that has been gone. That's, I would suggest, I was just going to say what you think about that, because that's gone by the wayside. And what happens is we also lose the sort of, there's the middle class that are colonized mentality, right? But there's also a middle class mentality that's always been there, and rightfully, or how do you put it, logically and rightfully, historically, was always loyal to the crown in England. And therefore, you know, that's like what we would say a kind of legitimate culture that's always been there. But if we don't recognize it, it kind of stays disguised, and it's not possible to sort of, you know, Stephen Ellis had that issue. He was saying that until you can't really delineate the Gaelic culture until you delineate also the English culture in Ireland. So you kind of have to get the two to get the proper contrast. I don't know what you think.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, certainly in terms of history, and then if you think going forward, I mean, if you talk about decolonisation, you talk about United Ireland, and what's to be done there. I think he's had Robbie McVeigh on a couple of weeks ago. He thought, or I was just finished reading his and Bill Ralston's book, and they talk about this concept of the mestizaje, I think is how you pronounce it, the sort of mix of people.
Well, I was going to ask you what that meant.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I think it's a great concept. I mean, that's why you have to go, and of course it has another attendant function there, which is to combat the nonsense of the far right, as though you know, white Irish Catholics were pure, and they still are, going back to whenever, and they're still sort of pure blood lineage and all this nonsense. And that actually it comes again with the article that I sent again about was it the Cherokee Nation? I can't remember. And they talked about this sort of notion, again, of purity, but even within an indigenous community in the US, there wasn't that, because there'd been intermixing, and there's all these different levels of mestizaje, I suppose. And what they talk about then is how you become a member of the tribe is through your sort of allegiance to it, through your sort of allegiance to the culture and so forth. But in terms of going forward, I like that concept, and it's a good concept to sort of build a United Ireland around. I think to recognise the differences that are there, especially now with the new Irish and so forth, of course, we have to do that. But I think also moving beyond that, even, it's useful to sort of have a bond, I suppose, or a national sort of culture of sorts within that would bond the decolonial project. And I think that should be Gaelic culture, because if you talk about decolonisation, you're talking really about reconquest or re-Gaelicization. And that doesn't mean in the vein of a sort of fascist project where you're sort of imposing things on people, but you're moving forward in a progressive way and bringing all this mestizaje mix of people with you, and, you know, putting that as a driving force, as a sort of wedge against multinational capital. And then as part of that, you could have what they have maybe in Bolivia, you know, part of any sort of move towards a United Ireland you'd have to get rid of the constitution. It's one of the things that drives me mad, is that they just think of the United Ireland as this sort of thing in the discourse. It's just grafting the 6 counties onto Dev's constitution in the 26 counties and tinkering with a few things here and there. Of course, it couldn't be. It'd have to be a complete redrawn or rewriting of the constitution in the mode of Bolivia or somewhere like that, like a plurinational constitution where a sort of autonomy for these different ethnicities, decentralization from out of the pale and out of the institutions, real local democracy, and not a sort of Catholic 1937 constitution, but just maybe change the symbols a bit to accommodate unionists. That's nonsense. That's not going to change anything, and it's not decolonisation by any stretch either.
Yeah, I would say the Gaelic mentality is nothing at all to do with nationality, nothing to do at all with surnames either. Well, not to do with surnames, but nothing to do with clans before lands kind of thing. It didn't have the county, didn't have the nationality, and this kind of stuff. And you would have found, I imagine, Old English in there. You would have found Spanish, Italian, French, who were also Gaels. So it wasn't a kind of Irish Gaelic mentality, and had nothing to do with Catholic either. So there is a way of bypassing them, because there is a default. And the default we're coming from is that we are part of that living history. We believe it. The geneticist tells us. They tell us there was a divergence in 360 years ago. Now, we say divergent, like genetic markers. Every human being on the planet is genetically related. We all came from the same gene pool. So all we could ever be talking about is mentalities and cultures and realities and so on and so forth. So the situation we're in Ireland is that we believe the traveller mentality, go back a bit further, Tinker, Itinerant, and so on and so forth, no settled people then. You're talking about Gaelic clans, you're talking about federations, you're talking about tuas, you're talking about complex systems where people understood there was a common sense of law and understanding. So I think if you were to look at the 1937, I think they also had the 1936 constitution. This is where Dublin was operating with its own laws, I believe. And then in 1937, they changed it. They scrapped the old one, went ahead with the new one. And even in there, they removed poor Sinead from playing the part of a fairy to Douglas Hyde's Tinker, because women were put in the home, I believe. That was their place from now on. It's just the more suppression. But I lost my trail of thought in that one, actually. I start thinking about Sinead and the fairy and the Tinker. But yeah, the constitution and the mentality, there has to be a way that we have to stand outside all of it for a moment, because we're not using the past. We're not romanticizing the past to live in it. That's impossible. Can't live in the future because we're stuck in the present. And the present for us still is an historical mechanism, environment, system, unchanged. As I mentioned earlier about the geneticists, divergence, we know that happened. There's another one where it's around bacteria gut bacteria, oddly enough. And they found this to be very high and old in Irish travellers. And they said it was a pre-industrial bacteria. So pre-industrial saying that it was older than 400 or 500 years, for the English conquest again. So we're talking about cultures, about recognizing ethnicities and so on and so forth. I don't think we're going anywhere unless people can understand or come to terms with all our shared colonial trauma, but also the narrative from travellers. That when they say for decades, my people have been saying it since the 80s, we can date it back right to 1830, saying that we are Tinkers, we are clans, we are Irish, we are from a Gaelic society. But right at this present moment, we've been boxed into this label called travellers, trapped into the one called Tinkers and so on and so forth. And them labels didn't come from a Gaelic culture. They came from a colonial mentality. So that clash we'll always have is about people can't move on. People can't be a default Irish. There can't even be a new Irish if people don't understand what the old Irish was in the first place. I think we're going to see a lot of these patterns of psychological issues keep playing out till I suppose we're having more conversations like this. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with that 100%. And of course, the way to sort of influence that is to get the history out there and to get the, I know there's sort of good work now around oral archiving and stuff around UCD. I don't know what your opinion of that is, because I know it's done through probably one of the traveller NGOs, but it seems to me that that's sort of the way forward. I mean, Irish was lucky enough to have it in the 30s when De Valera, one of the only good things he did, although he was oppressing women and travellers and everyone else in the 30s, one of the only good things he did was send people out to gather the folklore in the western areas, and document and record it, and that's there now, and people sort of, although they need to be more widely known, basically. And likewise, I would say with Travellers, that's our project about getting that public history aspect of Gaelic culture going, because as you say, if people don't know, it's a cliche history. If people don't know where they're coming from, they're not going to know where to go in this whole process of reimagining Ireland. You have to have it on a solid, firm basis. If it's just some patchy thing that they've picked up here and there, or 800 years of what they don't know, and then Collins fought Dev, and then everything was grand after that. That's not enough to build a future on, really, is it? 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I kind of feel sorry for a lot of people in general, particularly even say settled people, because a lot of people go through life and they go through the education system, and they might say, I was never taught that at school, or I was never told about that in school. That would have been useful, and so on and so forth. It's almost like they've been cheated somehow or another. It's almost like they've been trained and educated not to see what's before them. It's almost like default of the system that didn't come from a Gaelic county in the first place. So how the hell were they going to teach people an Irish language and a Gaelic history when it was designed to destroy it systematically in the beginning? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
Sorry, I'm just dealing with the fire. I was going to say it's cold, isn't it? I was going to say that, yeah. I was going to say that it has real. I was going to say one of the people probably wonder sometimes as well, why would, as you pointed out before, it's that idea in the 60s was we're going forward and everything. We're saying it's obviously typical of colonial countries. Many of them think that way, if you know what I mean. As in, it's only the conqueror's culture is the way forward. That's the only one we understand, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the modern world, and everything in our past is primitive and poor. But I would say that this was the imperative even in the 1890s when Douglas Hyde wrote the necessity for de-Anglicizing Ireland. And it pointed out that even if you were the most English Protestant person, or whatever way you want to put it, in Ireland, that it still was in your interests to the re-Gaelicization of Ireland was still very much in your interests, because not only would it solve a lot of the problems with the native population as they looked at it at that time, but it would also defeat this problem they had, which was that Dublin and the English part of Ireland at that time, no matter where you were, was always going to be culturally second fiddle to London, and it always would be parochial, is how he put it actually, on the world stage. If it didn't draw from the oldest culture on the island, and by default the sort of richest one in a sense, because it had been there long before any of the others. So like going back at least to maybe, well, what's our latest one in archaeology? At least to 2000 BC, say, and more, if you know what I mean. And the essential point is that not dealing with colonization means we're not dealing with we can't get as far as that re-Gaelicization business, but we can't stop the machine automatically eliminating the names, pushing travellers as in, labeling people, pushing people in various directions. It's all unconscious, favouring American capitalism over the native economy, and we can't actually stop it unless we sort of like look at that problem. And what's really fascinating is that, do you remember we were looking at, Bernard, I was looking at some newspaper articles, like the modern Irish economy, they keep waffling on about how great it's doing. And every time you look at it more closely, it's the American economy in Ireland that really does brilliantly. And the actual indigenous economy, as they call it, is I think right now is in recession. I'm pretty sure about that. Is in recession. It's got like really terrible figures for, I remember in 2017 or something, 50% of all indigenous Irish companies hadn't a website, never mind selling anything on a website. A few years later, I think there was another report about how it had lower than average, lower than average innovation or something. It was really, really poor.
Creativity.
What? Creativity, yeah, that kind of thing. There was loads of issues. And I know it's not the people. I mean, everyone there, but as you know, a lot of times in a lot of the country, if people want to do something, they end up leaving. But the reality is that it has a real economic consequences, or lack of access to that past. And the Irish language, of course, is one of the key ways to that past. But as we're pointing out here, as we're learning here as well, is that it's not quite enough just on its own. Everything has to be stitched together, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%, yeah. And I suppose it comes back to the sort of opening point that I had, is that people don't realise that the colonial mentality is a material thing, that it's not just some mentality that sort of floats there nebulously above everything, and you can either have it or you don't, or influences very little. It's actually rooted in decisions around the whole economy. So it's a material thing, and that leftists who call themselves materialists don't realise that ideology is material, and especially this colonial ideology that we've been talking about. And yes, 100% agree with you on that as well. The sort of the parochialism of Dublin led to creation in the 60s of a comprador class from the Portuguese word when they went and colonized Southeast Asia. Comprador meaning sort of a manager or a middleman that basically mediated between the colonial power and the native, and just extracted wealth for the colonial power. And that's what you have in the IDA now, and in all these sort of little groups, Fáilte Ireland, and all these government associations that are there to manage money on behalf of American and British and Irish capital as well. And we see that most egregiously now, I suppose, with the housing crisis and the massive Canadian pension funds and whatnot. They're there, but of course it's an Irish comprador who's setting up shop for these people. And what are they but not colonized compradors who are doing the sort of grubby work on the ground in the colony for them. And I think, in terms of you were mentioning the sort of push back against that, I think definitely we have to tread things together. And I suppose one of the things I've been researching now is the Gaelscoill, and it's interesting, even though the founders of the movement over the last 50 years, there was only a handful of schools in 1970. Now there's hundreds of them. It's a slow burning decolonial work, but they wouldn't call it decolonization. But that's what's going on. And I did oral interviews with some of them, and what I found fascinating was when you sort of looked into the tropes that they were using. You got stuff why they were doing it: self-belief, self-confidence, and self-reliance. Self-reliance being the major one, that you're standing on your own 2 feet as a sort of culture, and that this then bleeds into your thinking around the economy. And when I looked at that and then compared it with what the great decolonial theorists were writing, Fanon and these people, it was very similar, So that I found that very interesting. That even if the sort of theory isn't precisely there, of course, all these countries and cultures across the world who were colonized are thinking, what is the antidote to this? Those 3 things: self-belief, self-confidence, and sort of self-reliance.
You can see that connection, all right. Even Edward Said and people like that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way of seeing it. It's a strange thing because I say outside the colony, right? Again, nobody had any names or labels, and inside the colony there is this particular mentality that once came to Ireland, set up its institutions, colonized everybody. Then it went to the Americas, it went to West Indies, it went to Australia, it went to Canada, it went to all these other places. And that language itself, the one that came here, English, as far as I know, no linguistics expert, but as far as I know, it was made up, chopped up from other languages. Portuguese, I think, French, 20% belonged to Vikings. And as far as I know, it started off like a bartering, trading, systematic language. And I have this kind of theory about this language, is that it was so systematic and so unique to other cultures that when it came here, it was very robotic, systematic, and created this environment of class systems. And people were to know their classes. People were taught what to think, but were never told how to think. That had just continued. So when you see people like Edward Said and Von Fontaine and all these other people, they're talking about the exact same identical mentality as I would as an Irish traveller. I would say that's the same one that came here that went there. That's the same one that's connected to Europe. It's connected to old empires. It's connected to old ruling dynasties and so on and so forth. So the decolonization itself is almost like stepping outside our own mentality of thoughts This helps a lot if people go to the river and they let all their thoughts go with the flow and you just think about nothing. You can get to that point and start thinking, where did these words come from? Where did this language come from? Why am I thinking this language? Do they have behaviors to attach to them? Does organizations...
That raises an interesting question. Why does language have rules? Why were we taught these rules in grade school? Why is bad grammar bad grammar?
Well, when you're taught rules of your own language in grade school, the chances are very strong that what you're being taught is false. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to be taught it.
But I can see every grade school teacher about to throw an orange at you on the screen.
That big element was lost, of course, in the 1922s, in the counter revolution as well. And like you were saying about when you touch upon that, and that's another part of when things being stitched together, which we obviously think very important as well. And again, it suffers from that problem of importing an ideology from outside, which isn't rooted in Irish history and in an understanding of Irish colonialism, which is probably our historians or whatever's what we've just discussed. And then again, that slips between the cracks, doesn't it? It's not as effective, maybe, because it's, say, like addressing problems that are like American problem or a UK problem or something, but doing it without a proper reading of Irish history quite often. And therefore it ends up kind of like sort of not being quite relevant, you know. That's the kind of thing we would see a lot, and I think that would need to be addressed as well. And I think all of it addressed within if you put together within that post-colonial framework, it can all be addressed. But as you're saying, this is really interesting, is that you're still getting pushed back on that in academia. And as long as that's and so yeah, so that explains why it's not
yeah, I suppose
slow process.
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose it depends on how much influence you think academia has on the general populace as well. We know, like, if you look at revisionism, it probably had very little influence on the general populace in terms of, like, what Bernard was saying earlier. They was, you know, the Dublin, the institutions wanted to commemorate the Black and Tans, and the revisionists wanted to commemorate the Black and Tans, but most of Ireland didn't. And then in the 70s and 80s, of course, revisionism was about really counteracting the campaign of the Provisional IRA. That's all it was about, really. And it was sort of set out to revise/warp history to suit that agenda. Now it's gone into some abeyance recently, but it showed you that the people's, I mean, it was never doing public history. It was always writing for the inner cliques, which then would, like, you know, say what they wanted through the organs like the Irish Times or the Indo and the Sindo and so forth. There's still revisionists about, of course, and people in the Irish Times and places like that. But yeah, I suppose you have to do more public history, I suppose. It has to be part of a grassroots thing, really. I mean, I'm probably undervaluing how academia. No, I don't think I am. I'm trying to get the words right to assess what its real impact is, because most of the time it is up in the ivory tower and it's not bringing the history to the people, you know what I mean? And whether that be revisionist like it was in the 80s or now sort of post-revisionist, it's not doing it better than it was, mind you, in the decade of centenaries. But then, even then, some of that can be dodgy, I suppose. But we're definitely in a period where at least that period, the 1913 to 23, is being better understood. But, you know, to what end then? Because some of the commemorations and the sort of historical interpretations around it, they're just framed, or they're framed as history and history alone. They're not framed as something that can be part of a process of understanding to change the here and now, which is what history should be. Otherwise, it's just a fetish, really. It's just a hobby. It's not something that you're using to tackle today's problems, which is what I believe it should be, you know.
Yeah. Applying the science.
Critical research or whatever, critical theory or whatever you want to call it, but through history. But there's too much fetishism, what we call it, or and that happens in the Irish language as well, I suppose. It becomes a hobby language for people instead of something that they want to be part of a decolonial project. It's just the sort of mild marker of identity and, hobby, instead of, right, we're going to push this forward and use it to sort of change people's minds and drive society forward, not just us. I remember a historian we had out to, I'm a member of Mishnach, and we had him out in Rathcarn in our first sort of annual meeting. He said a great thing was, if you look for rights for yourself, say as an Irish language speaker, which is what a lot of Irish language speakers do, they just focus on language rights for themselves. They're not rights, they're privileges. You know what I mean? You have to be looking for rights for all the other minority groups as well and stitching them together. Otherwise, you're just sort of elevating yourself into a privileged position,
But yeah, I think there's a certain point where the language itself, it's almost corrupted, in my personal opinion, and that's someone that doesn't speak Irish. But it looks like it's been corrupted and mangled inside the system and then fed like bad medicine to people. That in some way they don't even want the language. They don't even understand why they need the language. And they're meant to feel that way for a very long time. I sense that's where people like Cara Kelly was talking about. She's been 14 years learning Irish or something. It's already been suppressed within the system. That's been happening from day one and the academias. So our difficulty, I suppose, would be translating, getting the guys who went to college, went to the universities, study this, study that. There's no way we can get it because, one, we'd have to go through the same programs of thinking and thought and teachings just to get there. And if we got there, we mightn't be who we were when we started off. There has to be a kind of a way through that, I think, taking work that you've done, with your permission, of course, but it almost transforming that into a very basic art form. Would it be animation? Would it be a documentary? Would it be a film? Some sort of another. So then people can connect with it. Because I know myself, I grew up without the formal education. And people with formal education think they're default intelligent also. And the person without the formal education could not be intelligent.
For punishing them, for killing them, for jailing them, for praising them, for giving them extra money, for telling them they're so smart and wonderful and kind, at some point in the future, there's a good chance we're going to sit there and look back at this and say, oh my God, the things we didn't know about then, the damage that we did thinking we understood behavior and that there was choice and responsibility and agency. And that's not just going to be scientists 300 years from now. Almost certainly we're going to last long enough to sit there and in some of these realms.
Oh, definitely. And it's something you actually see. I remember having a discussion with someone about it when I was starting my PhD, and he sort of said, we were talking about the jargon and the language and the use of, terminology and whatnot. And he was like, well, that's the way you have to write it because it proves that you've mastered your discipline or something like that. And I disagreed with him because what's the point? Who are you mastering it for? You're mastering it for a small clique of people who can read that, and it doesn't impact society in any sort of wider way. It has to be distilled down into, as you say, various mediums, whether that be plain or English, whether it be visual, any sort of art form, any sort of thing that can be, YouTube videos, podcasts, anything that can be sort of more easily absorbed by the general populace. Otherwise, there's no point. You're just writing and then it's going on a shelf in a library or disappearing down the back of some digital repository with 12 views or something. You know what I mean? It has to be brought to the people 100%. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. Like I said to you, I mean, it's a struggle when you're trying to work out things. Like if you're growing up as a child, if you're a native Irish speaker, you still get uttered. You're still frowned upon. You're still looked down upon. You're still like, why are you speaking the stupid language? Why do you need it? I mean, they're the ripple effects of penal laws. That's how people were meant to feel in the first place. To be feel during the famine, that somehow or another it was because of their language and their culture and their ways that all this happened in the first place. That has echoed throughout the centuries and even today with travellers. Because if you go back in, it was Enda Kenny, and he was like, people within a people.
Our traveller community is an integral part of our society for over 1,000 years, with their own distinct identity, people within our people.
Culture. And the irony of all of that, when you grow up and you learn a bit more, is that the whole settled population, the whole settled concept and ideas was born out of English culture and ways of seeing the world.
What would you think yourself about the steps that's been made in terms of documenting the history of travellers? There's probably not enough been done, is there?
We actually were working on a couple of animations at the moment. And basically, if we get away with it, it goes from the lovely, beautiful Gaelic world, colonisation comes, and then it goes into the future and it lands at travellers. When I say travellers, Gaels, and that connection, that doesn't rule anybody else out, because, like I said, we came from the west of Ireland. We know our people. And we also know the travellers lived in houses. We know the travellers had farms. We know travellers had castles. It's not about the label. It's always about the mentality, that particular frequency that people operated on. And through the cant language and the words and the bits and pieces, very similar to native Irish. They know they can be in an English world, an English environment, an English-speaking world, but at the same time, they know they're connected to a Gaelic culture, particularly through that language. Now, that doesn't take it away from anyone else either. It's an unfortunate kind of a colonial side effect, even for townspeople, we call them, is that they've been almost stripped completely and thrown into the town, removed from the Irish language, removed from culture and knowledge and so on and so forth. And sometimes you'll actually see that the settled people are as much, if not more, oppressed than travellers, but we're in a kind of a live situation where it's systematic, ongoing, where theirs is almost like a silent trauma. Another rant for myself, but thank you very much for whatever the question was in the beginning.
Well, we would have traced that one to the 60s, where one of the first preambles of the 1963 report was that we're going to do X, Y, and Z and find out all these things. But the one thing we're not going to do is ask any questions about history. And it specifically says that we're going to leave that to historians, supposedly, right? But which they kind of don't, or whatever. But it seems to me that that's very much on purpose, and that, you know, obviously systematically from that point onward, the idea is that the one thing you're not going to do is you're not going, and we all know what happens when people's history is stripped from them. And we could say that it's happened to the whole country in some ways. No matter what your background is, but as you're saying, Bernard, the coalface, travellers are on the coalface because they're literally the people that the state has kept in engagement with, almost similar to the kind of the old Pale or the old colonial administration's way of dealing, sort of like, you know, like dealing with the Indians on the plains, for want of a better way of putting it, like dealing with the, you know, from the cowboy perspective or the American states perspective, very similar. The old way of dealing with the Irish enemies in the hills, if you know what I mean. They've kept that, because you would say, Bernard, they only had two departments in the government dealing with travellers issues, which was Department of Health, is it? So on the one hand, there's it's almost a medical issue, and the other one is the Department of Justice.
Segregation, that sticks with you. There's not, it doesn't come out of your mind. Being othered and being pillarized to death with names, being gaslighted when you're trying to answer, or whatever it might be. So all of that was happening. So yeah, it does play a part in it. But I'm hoping I haven't put you off in any ways. And if you have any solutions to the future, please throw them out.
Jeez, no, it's been fascinating and a pleasure talking about you. Learned a lot myself, yeah.
That's brilliant.
And yeah, we can keep in contact going forward, certainly, yeah.
Tell us, because we had in our mind that maybe the Professional Historians Association might be like a federation of Jedis, but that's
something like that, is it?
Yeah, but it's mostly young scholars who are trying to sort of get their foot on the ladder, you know, because there's that issue of precarity is very big in academia at the moment, not being able to get a job, short-term contracts and all the rest of it. And actually that sort of feeds into a lot of the stuff we were talking about earlier, revisionism and whatnot, and how those contracts are doled out, and you know how permanent places are doled out. They're less likely to give them to people who are sort of, as you say, thinking outside the box or thinking outside the colony.
Yeah,
so I won't say any more about that.
No. Well, history in general, though, as we know, it's kept. It's, you know, there you go, as you said, a fetish. It's kept as a kind of, oh yeah, sure, isn't it great? You're interested in those things.
That's it, yeah.
As if it wasn't a critical to, like, even what we talked about, the economy and all kinds of things. The writer, he lives in, I think he's in Spain, isn't it? Broken Harp. We have
That's it. Yeah, yeah.
a copy of the Broken Harp.
He was in Catalonia. Yeah,
I was going to say to you, McSimone, he was a lecturer here in Sligo in the
He spent time in Sligo. Yeah, yeah.
Did you, in the 1970s?
70s or 80s.
He was a friend of my father's. I was going to say.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, Declan Bree and all of them. Do you remember? I found that out by accident a while ago.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Hopefully, we move forward. We'll have more talks. I'll get a bit sharper at them maybe, and I'll stop talking for a lot less. But I'm hoping also that colleges, universities, Indian historians, if there's ways that we can connect and filter that into the arts, as I mentioned earlier. Because I'm confident, I'm more than confident that we put these into animations and films and so on and so forth, you will change a mentality overnight, because the vast majority of people deep down know something isn't quite right with this current mentality, this reality. How could it be when it was shaped and designed from somebody else's mentality in the first place? And there'll always be that uncomfortability or loss of identity, maybe. Anyhow, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on, and I hope to see both of you again in the very near future.
Going to meet him, Maggie. Thanks very much.
Keep well, my friends.
Right. Slán.